Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to deconstruct the rhetoric of political commentator Charlie Kirk. We're going to break down how his most controversial statements are actually designed to be heard in two completely different, totally opposing ways.
Okay, let's just jump right in with a really charged statement from Kirk. The words themselves, pretty simple, but their impact and what they actually mean, well, that completely changes depending on who's listening.
And this is where it gets fascinating. You have the exact same words, creating two totally separate realities that just can't coexist. For his supporters, this is him being brave, right? Speaking a courageous truth about policies they think are dangerous. But for his critics, it's a classic racist dog whistle, just using a current political issue to launder old prejudices.
So that's the big question, isn't it? How can one statement be seen as both an act of love and an act of hate? To figure that out, we've got to peel back the layers and look at the actual communication strategy that makes both of these readings possible. All right, first up, frame one, the loving truth. Let's get inside how his supporters hear this kind of language, how it's seen not just as acceptable, but as an act of faith. So this framework has its own kind of logic, a logic that basically makes it bulletproof from outside criticism. First, you take political speech and you elevate it. It's not just politics anymore, it's a divine mandate. The speaker's authority doesn't come from facts, it comes from their identity as a Christ follower. And here's the kicker. When people on the outside criticize it, that isn't seen as a valid point. Nope. It's reframed as persecution, which only proves they must be on the right track. Okay, so a really key concept that pops up a lot, especially when we're talking about gender, is something called complementarianism. The idea, which you'll find in some conservative Christian circles, is that men and women are totally equal in value. Ontologically equal is the term, but they're functionally different. God, in this view, has designed distinct roles. Men are for headship or leadership, and women for support. So with that in mind, let's look at this statement directed at Taylor Swift. From inside that complementarian framework, this doesn't sound like misogyny at all. It's heard as sincere, even loving, biblically based advice. The goal, from that perspective, is to guide her toward what they believe is a more fulfilling, God-ordained life.
Okay, let's flip the coin. Now we're looking at frame two, the critical response. This is how critics, and that includes a lot of people of faith, break down the exact same arguments. From this side, the argument is that what we're hearing isn't authentic Christianity at all. Instead, they label it an ideology called Christian nationalism. And what is that? Well, it's basically collapsing Christian faith into a very specific and often divisive American political identity. You're using what the source calls a thin veneer of Christian vocabulary to make a political project sound sacred. And this pushback often comes from inside the Christian community. This quote from Reverend F. Bruce Williams, a Black pastor, is just, wow. It's a direct challenge. He's saying, point blank, that this rhetoric has nothing to do with the faith he knows or the Jesus he knows. It's a complete rejection of its religious framing. So critics started using some pretty strong labels. One that got a lot of traction was religious delusion. But that raises a big question for researchers. Does calling something a delusion actually work? Does it persuade anyone, or does it just make people dig in their heels even more? And the results from the study are pretty wild. Look at this. When Kirk supporters were shown a quote labeled a religious delusion, guess what happened to their trust in him? Nothing. It didn't move an inch. Total backfire. But, and this is the fascinating part, when they saw the same quote labeled a religious rationalization, their trust took a nosedive, a really significant drop. So what's going on here? Why the difference? Well, the word delusion feels like a personal attack. It's clinical. It's like you're not just questioning their argument, you're questioning their sanity, their faith, their very identity. And that, of course, makes people put their walls up. Rationalization, on the other hand, is different. It critiques the process, the way they're thinking, without attacking the person themselves. And that turned out to be way more effective. So all of this brings us to the heart of the analysis. There's actually an academic term for this whole strategy we've been unpacking. It's called spiritualized moral licensing, or SML for short. Think of it like this. It's using religious language to get a moral permission slip. It's a way to say things that might otherwise sound derogatory or harmful, but you soften them or justify them by wrapping them in the language of faith. And it's a pretty straightforward three-step process. Step 1, make an inflammatory statement about a certain group of people. Step 2, frame that statement, not as your opinion, but as a loving or biblical truth. And step 3, you leverage that religious authority as a shield, right? It deflects any secular critique.
And this example just lays it all out perfectly. You've got this statement about a Nuremberg-style trial for doctors. In one frame, the loving truth frame, it's a righteous crusade to protect kids. In the other, the critical response, it's incredibly violent rhetoric that could incite real harm. Spiritualized moral licensing is the engine that makes both of those interpretations possible. It's what creates those two separate worlds. Okay, so why does all this matter? Well, this strategy might feel very 21st century, but trust me, it's not new at all. And when you look at its history, you really start to understand why it's still so potent today. The source material lays out a pretty clear timeline here. This exact playbook has been run over and over in American history. In the 1850s, you had biblical interpretations being used to justify slavery. Fast forward to the early 1900s, and it's being used to oppose women's suffrage, framing it as against God's natural order. Then in the 1960s, it's used to argue against interracial marriage. See the pattern? The issues change, but the core strategy, using sacred language to prop up a social hierarchy, is a constant.
And that brings us to today, where the implications are huge. This strategy effectively yanks political debates out of the world of rational, evidence-based arguments and drops them into the realm of faith. And once they're there, they're basically impossible to argue against with facts. It just deepens the divide, creating these closed loops where, as we saw before, any criticism from the outside just makes the belief on the inside even stronger. You can probably see how this creates a massive headache for social media platforms, right? They all have rules against hate speech, but they also have protections for religious expression. Spiritualized moral licensing is designed to live right in that little gray area between the two, which puts content moderators in an almost impossible position. And that really leaves us with the big, unanswered question at the center of all this. It's a question for our laws, for our tech platforms, for our whole society, really. And we're all still trying to figure it out. Where is the line between protected religious conviction and regulated hate speech?